I thought about Joe Pasquale. And I've thought about Joe Pasquale once before in my life. They say that you think about Joe Pasquale twice in your career. Once on the way up. And here's why I thought about Joe Pasquale. Right? It was in 1995. And the reason was because when I started doing the comedy circuit in London in about 1989, there used to be this Irish comic on the circuit called Michael Redmond, right? He was great. He lives in Glasgow now. And he had big bushy hair and a kind of long droopy moustache and deep-set bloodhound eyes. And he always used to wear a long brown Mac and carry a little plastic bag. And what he used to do, right, was he'd walk out on stage and he'd stand still in silence for about a minute and a half looking weird. And then he would say, a lot of people say to me, get out of my garden. Now, I think that is the greatest opening line ever. Not just for a comedy set, either for anything. I don't think there's a book or a film or a poem or a play that couldn't be improved by having a lot of people say to me, get out of my garden. The book of Genesis would be a lot better. You feel it would kind of cut to the chase of what it was really about, save a lot of faff if you went straight in there. And it always used to get a good laugh, that line, but it got a much better laugh, Michael's joke, in 1995, when Joe Pasquale did it as one of his jokes in his Raw Variety performance set of that year. And there's always been a kind of tradition of the mainstream acts stealing our jokes. In fact, you might remember at the end of 2004, Jimmy Carr had to take Jim Davidson to task for stealing some of his material, right? Although, to be honest, if Jim Davidson can steal your material, maybe it's time to think about dropping it. Although, to be fair to Jimmy Carr, it was a kind of sexist, woman-hating bit that he'd written with a sense of irony that Jim Davidson was able to appropriate at face value. One of the kindest things you can say about Jim Davidson as a fellow comic is he's not a writer-performer who's troubled by the notion of duality of meaning. There's always been this kind of material theft tradition. So I rang up, I did an article for a Sunday newspaper in 1995, and I rang up Joe Pasquale about this idea of stealing material. And I said to him, Joe, how did you think up that joke about the garden? And Joe Pasquale said, and this is true, he said, I thought if someone looked out of their window and they saw me in their garden, they would say, get out of my garden. Now, that's not quite right, is it? Because if you looked out of your window and you saw Joe Pasquale in the garden, you'd just go, is that Joe Pasquale in the garden? What can he possibly want? You know? You might even be frightened, right? Because that joke only works if a kind of anonymous weirdo is saying it. As soon as you introduce a celebrity into it, it's kind of structurally compromised. So I said to him, are you sure you thought that joke up? And he said he couldn't remember if it was his idea. And it is sometimes difficult to remember if you've had an idea, especially when they occur as thick and fast, as they must do in the mind of Joe Pasquale. And under duress, he admitted one of his writers might have written it. Turned out what he meant by writers was not so much people that wrote for him as people that went around writing things down that other comedians had thought of. So I said to him, the thing is, it's Michael Redmond's joke, you shouldn't be doing it. And what a lot of the mainstream acts say, they say that they don't think it's possible to own a joke. They say they don't think you can copyright a joke. So, bearing that in mind, I've tried to write a joke that Joe Pasquale won't be able to steal. And it goes like this. Joe Pasquale goes into a bar. He says to the barman, I'd like a pint of beer, please. And the barman says, why don't you just come around the bar, help yourself to the beer, and then walk off without paying for it? After all, you are Joe Pasquale. Or perhaps send in someone else to steal the beer for you. And then deny that beer can actually be owned. Say that you find the very concept of the ownership of beer hard to understand. Or better still, insist that it's your beer and that you brewed it at home. In your house. Even though your home lacks the most rudimentary of brewing facilities. Someone nearly clapped alone there. But then they stopped because, of course, for a comedian, the only thing worse than the sound of no one clapping is the sound of one person clapping alone. So it indicates that what you have is a very specialised appeal and no commercial future. As if I didn't know that.